The Catwoman who sat beside me every morning on the park bench. The woman on the park bench had the kindest eyes he'd ever seen. A strange thing to notice when the first thing you saw was the delicate calico fur tracing her jawline. For weeks, Graham had said nothing, content to let her impossible existence be the one mystery in his quiet, lonely life. He took a slow sip of his coffee, the warmth of the cup a familiar comfort against the morning chill. Every day for the past month had been the same. He would arrive at precisely 7:15, claim the second bench from the oak tree, and open a newspaper he had no intention of reading. It was a prop, a shield. It allowed him to watch without seeming to. She arrived at 7:20 as she always did. Her name, he decided, was Sylvie. It seemed to fit her quiet grace. She moved with a deliberate gentleness, her long coat swaying around her ankles as she chose her own bench, the one directly across the path. The calico markings that softened her features were not a trick of the light. They were real, a soft downy fur that crept from her temples down her jaw. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, missed nothing. Graham felt a familiar ache in his chest, the dull throb of a life lived too cautiously. At 58, his world had shrunk to his small apartment and the sterile office where he managed logistics. This park and this impossible woman were his only deviation from the script. He wondered what she did. Did she have a job to go to? A home? He had 1,000 questions, but the distance between their benches felt as vast as the space between stars. Today she did something different. Instead of opening the small, weathered book she often carried, she simply watched the wind stir the fallen leaves. A single amber leaf detached from the oak and spiraled down, landing near the toe of her boot. She leaned forward not to pick it up but to study it, her head tilted with an air of profound curiosity. Graham found himself holding his breath, captivated by the simple act. He had seen 1,000,000 leaves fall. He had never truly looked at one. He folded his newspaper and placed it beside him, the rustle of the paper sounding like a thunderclap in the quiet morning. Her head lifted, and for the first time her green eyes met his directly. There was no alarm in them, only a calm acknowledgement. Graham's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt exposed, his quiet observation laid bare. He should look away, pretend to be interested in a passing dog, but he could not. She offered a small, hesitant smile. It transformed her face, making the kind eyes even kinder. Then she broke the silence that had defined their shared mornings for weeks. "Does it always happen so quickly?" she asked. Her voice was melody, soft and clear, without the city's hard edge. Graham blinked, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry." "The change," she clarified, gesturing with a delicate hand toward the trees. "One day the world is green and the next it is made of fire and gold. It feels so sudden, so beautifully final." He had never thought of it that way. For him, autumn was just a herald of winter, a signal to find his heavier coat and brace for the cold. "I suppose it does," he said, his own voice sounding rough to his ears. "You get used to it, happens every year." "Getting used to something does not make it less remarkable," Sylvie replied, her gaze returning to the canopy of color above them. "Where I am from, the cycles are much slower. A great change might take a lifetime to witness." The comment hung in the air, an open door to a question he was too afraid to ask. Where was she from? He opted for the safer path. "It is beautiful," he agreed, looking up at the leaves himself. "But it means the cold is coming. Most people around here are not fond of the cold." "Why not?" she asked, her curiosity genuine. "The world grows quiet, it rests. Is rest not a good thing?" Graham considered this. He thought of his quiet apartment, the silence that was his constant companion. It was not rest, it was emptiness. "I think," he said slowly, "that some of us have a bit too much quiet already." The words were more honest than he had intended. A flicker of understanding passed over her features. She stood, not in a way that signaled departure but as a simple transition. She crossed the short distance of the paved path and, to his complete astonishment, sat on the other end of his bench. The air around her smelled faintly of rain and something else, something clean and wild, like a forest after a storm. "Perhaps you are just listening for the wrong things," she said gently. She was close enough now that he could see the individual hairs of the calico fur, the way they caught the morning light. It was breathtakingly strange and undeniably real. "What should I be listening for?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "For the beginnings," Sylvie said, her green eyes sparkling with a warmth that pushed back the morning chill and the deeper cold inside him. "Even when things appear to be ending, they are also beginning. The trees are not dying. They are preparing for a new season of life." Graham looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a mystery or an impossibility, but as the person sitting next to him. The loneliness that had been his shadow for so long seemed to recede, chased away by her presence. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man waiting for his life to be over. He felt as if something was just about to start. He smiled, a genuine expression that felt foreign on his own face. The park bench suddenly felt less like a refuge and more like a destination. He bought 2 coffees the next morning, an act of uncharacteristic optimism. Holding the warm cups, he walked toward the park with a lighter step than he had felt in a decade. She was there on their bench now, and she looked up as he approached, a small, welcoming smile gracing her lips. "I was not sure if you would be here," Graham said, offering her one of the cups. Sylvie accepted it, her slender fingers brushing his. The touch was brief, but it sent a pleasant warmth through him that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Where else would I be? The story of the season is still unfolding." Their conversations became the new rhythm of his life. Each morning, they spoke of more than just the weather. He told her about his job, processing data streams for a logistics firm, a life spent in the quiet hum of servers and spreadsheets. He found himself describing the intricate patterns he saw in the numbers, something he had never thought to share with anyone before. She listened with an intensity that made him feel truly seen. In return, she shared stories of her own, painting pictures with words of places he could hardly imagine. She spoke of cities where buildings were grown, not built, and skies that held a perpetual twilight glow. "You must have traveled a great deal," Graham said one morning, captivated. "My people value perspective," she replied, her gaze distant for a moment. "We believe you cannot understand a thing until you have seen it from many angles, from a distance, from up close, and from a place where it does not exist at all." He assumed she was speaking in metaphors, of a philosophy he did not recognize. It was beautiful and strange, much like her. He found he did not need to understand the specifics. The feeling her words gave him was enough. It was a feeling of expansion, as if the small world he inhabited was growing larger with every story she told. One afternoon, a week later, the sky turned a bruised purple without warning. A sudden downpour sent the few other park-goers scattering for cover. Graham and Sylvie were caught in the deluge. He instinctively grabbed her hand, a gesture that felt both bold and perfectly natural. "This way," he said, pulling her gently toward a massive, ancient oak tree whose branches formed a dense canopy. They huddled together under the leafy shelter, the rain forming a curtain around them. The scent of wet earth and her unique, clean fragrance filled the small space. Droplets clung to the fine calico fur at her temples, sparkling like tiny jewels. He had the sudden urge to reach out and brush one away. He resisted, instead focusing on the rhythm of the rain. "I used to hate the rain," he confessed, his voice low. "It always felt like the city was weeping." "Or perhaps it is washing things clean," Sylvie suggested, looking up at him. Her green eyes were wide and earnest. "So you can see what truly matters." In that moment, pressed close against the rough bark of the tree, the world outside fell away. There was only the sound of the rain and the steady presence of the woman beside him. He saw what mattered. It was this connection, this profound, inexplicable peace he felt whenever she was near. He realized his loneliness had not simply receded. It was gone, replaced by a deep and blossoming affection for this mysterious, kind-hearted person. He did not know where she came from, or why she had fur like a cat, or how she saw the world with such wondrous clarity. He only knew that he trusted her completely. As the rain softened to a drizzle, a sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the clearing. It cast a soft glow on her face. "The beginning after the end," Graham murmured, echoing the first words she had ever spoken to him that truly mattered. Sylvie's smile was the warmest thing he had ever seen. "Exactly," she said. "Now the world is new again." He looked out from under the branches at the glistening park, and for the first time he believed it. His world was new. He was no longer a man waiting on a bench for his life to pass him by. He was a man standing in the gentle after-rain light, holding the hand of someone who felt more like home than any place he had ever known. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would do anything to protect that feeling. The days that followed held a new rhythm. Their meetings on the bench were no longer the start and end of their time together, but a prelude. They would walk through the park, their hands brushing, as he pointed out the architectural details of the old city buildings bordering the green space, and she would tell him how the light on Kaelin bent differently through the atmosphere, painting the mornings in shades he could not imagine. He never questioned the name of her home. It felt as natural as his own. His world had expanded to include her, and he wanted to share that world with the only other person who mattered. "I'd like you to meet my friend, Adeline," Graham said one afternoon as they sat with coffees at a small outdoor cafe. "She's been my neighbor for 20 years. My only real friend, I suppose." Sylvie's gaze was steady and warm. "I would like that very much." Adeline was a force of nature, practical and sharp-witted, with a laugh that could startle pigeons. She met them at the cafe the next day, her eyes taking in Sylvie with a frank curiosity that bordered on suspicion. She noted the fine calico fur along Sylvie's jaw, the unusual brilliance of her green eyes, and the graceful way she held her cup. "So, Sylvie," Adeline began after the pleasantries were exchanged, "Graham tells me you're a traveler." "Of a sort," Sylvie replied, her voice calm. "I find new places fascinating. The way life adapts is a constant wonder." "And where are you from originally?" Adeline pressed, her tone friendly but her eyes sharp. Graham felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had never asked. He realized in that moment he had actively avoided asking, content to live within the beautiful mystery she presented. "A place very far from here," Sylvie said, her smile never wavering. "It is not on any map you would recognize." The conversation continued, but the dynamic had shifted. Adeline steered the talk toward concrete things: last names, occupations, family. To each question, Sylvie gave an answer that was both polite and beautifully evasive. When they parted ways, Adeline gave Graham a tight, meaningful hug. "Call me later," she whispered. He did. "She's lovely, Graham," Adeline said over the phone. "Truly. But she's hiding something big. I'm not saying it's bad, but you're walking into this with your eyes closed. Just be careful." The conversation left him feeling cold. Adeline's pragmatism had pierced the warm bubble he and Sylvie had created. It was not her fault. She was a good friend, worried for him. The truth was, she was right. He was walking with his eyes closed, guided only by a profound sense of trust. But trust, he now understood, was not the absence of questions. It was the courage to ask them. The next morning on their bench, the air was crisp and clear. He waited for a comfortable silence before he spoke. "Sylvie," he started, his voice gentle, "Adeline's questions made me realize something. I have never asked you where you are from. I have never asked you anything important about your past." She turned to him, her expression open and patient. "I don't need to know," he continued, wanting her to understand. "Whatever your story is, it doesn't change how I feel. It doesn't change you. But I want you to know that you can tell me. You don't have to protect me from it." He looked directly into her eyes. "I trust you. Completely." A single tear traced a path through the soft fur on her cheek. She did not wipe it away. "Your trust is the greatest gift I have ever received, Graham." She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the familiar park as if seeing it for the last time. My home is a planet called Kalen. It orbits a star you cannot see from here. Graham's mind went still. He heard the words and they registered intellectually, but the emotional reality was a slow, deep wave. Alien. The word was too small, too clinical for the person sitting beside him. We are a very old species, she continued, her voice quiet but firm. My appearance, the fur, my eyes, this is my natural form. I am an emissary sent here to observe and to seek refuge. A faction on my world has grown aggressive. They see worlds like Earth not as places of wonder but as collections of resources to be taken. I came here to find a different path, to find an ally. He stared at her, at the familiar kindness in her face, the gentle curve of her smile. He saw the woman who taught him that endings were just beginnings, the woman who stood with him in the rain, the woman who had single-handedly dismantled his loneliness. He saw Sylvie. The shock was there, a distant tremor beneath his feet, but it was not fear. It was awe. His quiet, predictable life had intersected with something vast and extraordinary. He thought of her veiled words, her unique perspective, the way she saw the world. It all made a sudden, brilliant sense. He reached out and for the first time gently brushed the tear from her cheek. His fingers were steady. The fur was softer than he could have imagined. An ally, he repeated, his voice filled with a conviction that surprised him. You found one. His declaration hung in the air between them, a promise that settled the tremor of her revelation. The park, once a simple backdrop for their quiet courtship, now felt like the center of two colliding worlds. Graham looked at Sylvie, truly looked at her, and saw not an alien emissary but the same woman who had awakened his dormant heart. The calico fur along her jaw and the piercing green of her eyes were no longer a mystery to be solved, but a truth to be cherished. What do we do now? He asked, his voice low. It was not a question of doubt but of partnership. For now we do what we have always done, Sylvie replied, her hand finding his on the bench. Her touch was warm, solid. We continue. To be seen as normal is the best protection I have. Her gaze drifted towards the path, but we must be more watchful. Graham followed her line of sight. A man was approaching, walking with a deliberate, unhurried pace. He was dressed in a tidy blazer and carried a leather satchel, looking like a professor on his way to a lecture. He slowed as he neared their bench, his expression one of polite curiosity. Pardon me, the man said, his voice smooth and academic. I hope I am not interrupting. My name is Everett. He gestured vaguely towards Sylvie. I couldn't help but notice, and my field is genetic anthropology. I study unique hereditary expressions. May I ask you a few questions? Graham felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He stood, placing himself slightly between Everett and Sylvie. She's not an exhibit. Everett raised his hands in a placating gesture. Of course not. My apologies. I meant no offense. It is simply that your condition is remarkable. A form of hypertrichosis, I assume, but the pigmentation is unlike anything documented. Is it congenital? Sylvie's expression remained serene. I am not a subject of study, Mr. Everett. Doctor, actually, he corrected gently, his smile never wavering. And I understand completely, but my research could help people. Understanding the pathways of such a rare trait could lead to breakthroughs. He looked past Graham directly at Sylvie. You said you are not a subject. Does that mean you are from somewhere else? A community that shares these traits? The question was a hook, baited and cast with precision. Graham felt the shift in the air. This was not a chance encounter. He saw the intense focus in Everett's eyes, a clinical assessment that had nothing to do with scientific curiosity and everything to do with identification. We were having a private conversation, Graham said, his tone firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Everett's smile finally thinned. He ignored Graham and spoke to Sylvie again. The patterns are so specific. Almost like the star chart seen from the Kalen system, if one were to imagine such a thing. The name hit Graham like a physical blow. It was a shot in the dark, a test, and it landed perfectly. Sylvie's composure did not break, but he felt her hand tighten on his. The park was no longer their sanctuary. It was a trap. "I think you should leave," Graham said. He took a step forward. He was not a large man, nor an intimidating one, but his voice carried a weight of absolute conviction. Everett held his gaze for a long moment, the pleasant mask of the academic falling away to reveal something cold and appraising. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming a suspicion. He reached into his blazer and produced a small, pristine business card, holding it out. "Should you change your mind," Everett said, his voice returning to its placid tone, "my institution is very interested in preservation." Neither Graham nor Sylvie moved to take the card. After a moment, Everett placed it on the edge of the bench. He turned and walked away with the same unhurried pace, disappearing down the path. For a full minute, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the city seemed to rush back in, distant sirens and the laughter of children, all alien to the silent crisis that had just unfolded on their bench. Graham looked at the card. It listed a name, a title, and an institute for biological research that he had never heard of. He picked it up, his fingers tight on the cardstock. He knew, Sylvie said, her voice barely a whisper. He was not searching, he was confirming. Graham met her gaze. The fear was there, but beneath it was something stronger. A fierce, protective fire he had not felt in decades. He had spent years of his life in quiet observation, a passive witness to the world. That man was gone. "The faction you spoke of," Graham said, "he's one of them." "An agent," she confirmed, "sent to find me, to stop me before I could find an ally." A sad, ironic smile touched her lips. He was too late. He looked into her eyes and saw the weight of her galaxy-spanning struggle. He thought of his quiet apartment, his predictable job, the simple life he had guarded for so long. It was all about to be swept away, and he did not care. All that mattered was the woman beside him. His quiet life had not been an ending. It had been a long, patient preparation for this single, vital purpose. He tore the business card in half, then in half again, and let the pieces fall from his hand. "We can't stay here," he said, the decision solidifying as he spoke the words. "Your mission was to find an ally. My first duty as that ally is to make sure you are safe." Sylvie nodded, her eyes shining with a trust that humbled him. The warmth of their connection had been forged into an alliance of unyielding strength. Their park bench romance was over. A desperate, interstellar partnership had just begun. The crisp air that had once been a comfort now felt thin and dangerous. Graham stood, his hand finding Sylvie. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. "My apartment is too predictable," he said, his mind racing past the shock and into strategy. "He'll know my address. He likely knows everything. He will expect us to use public transit or a hired car," Sylvie added, her gaze sweeping the park exits. "Anything with a digital trail." "So we walk," Graham decided. "We stay off the main roads. I know this city, every alley, every shortcut. I've walked them for 30 years. He pulled her gently toward a less used path that wound behind a thicket of overgrown hedges. It was a route he took when he wanted to feel completely alone. Now it was their escape. They moved at a brisk pace, not running, but with a purpose that would look odd to any casual observer. Graham's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm against the steady calm of Sylvie's presence beside him. He risked a glance back. 2 men in plain, dark coats stood near their bench, their attention fixed on the path where they had been sitting. They had not been there a moment ago. "They're already here," he murmured, pulling Sylvie into the narrow space between a brick building and a wrought iron fence. He pressed himself flat against the cool brick, shielding her. "They are trackers," Sylvie said, her voice low and even. "They are not trained for direct confrontation, but they will follow. They will corner us for Everett." He thought of Adeline, her warnings, her skepticism. She was the only other person in his life, the only possible node in a network that consisted of him and Sylvie. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her name. It was a risk, a huge one, but the alternative was being entirely alone, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him that they would not last long that way. "I have to call a friend," he said. "It's our only chance." He pressed the call button. It rang twice before Adeline's sharp, impatient voice came through. "Graham, what is it? I'm in the middle of something." Adeline listened to me very carefully, he said, keeping his voice steady. "Do not ask questions. Are you at your apartment?" "Yes, but—" "Go to your window, the one that faces east over the old Market Street. Tell me what you see." There was a rustle of movement, a frustrated sigh. "Graham, this is ridiculous. I see the street. I see the flower vendor closing up. And I see you and Sylvie, for heaven's sake, hiding in an alley like a pair of teenagers. What is going on?" "Look past us," Graham urged. "Down the street, a gray sedan, and two men on the corner pretending to read newspapers. Have you ever seen them before?" A long silence stretched over the line. Graham could picture her perfectly, leaning against the glass, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. He saw Sylvie watching him, her trust absolute. It was the heaviest and most wonderful burden he had ever carried. "No," Adeline said finally, her voice stripped of all its earlier annoyance. "They don't belong. They're watching you. Graham, who are those men?" "The people I told you about," he said simply. "We need help. We need a safe place just for a few hours." Another pause. It was the moment his old life and his new one hinged upon. He held his breath. "My building service entrance is in the back alley," Adeline said, her tone all business now. "The code is my father's birthday. You know the one. Get here. Now." The line went dead. Relief washed over Graham so intensely his knees felt weak. He looked at Sylvie. "She believes us." "An unexpected alliance," Sylvie said, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. "Your friend is more than she seems." "She's loyal," Graham replied. "That's all that matters." They navigated the labyrinth of back streets, a world of dumpsters and fire escapes Graham knew as well as his own living room. He kept them in the shadows, moving from one pool of darkness to the next. The city felt different now, its familiar corners filled with potential threats. Every passing car seemed to slow, every pedestrian's glance felt like a search. He was no longer an observer of life in the city. He was a participant in its hidden dangers. They reached the service entrance without incident. Graham keyed in the code, and a heavy steel door clicked open into a dimly lit corridor that smelled of disinfectant. They hurried up 3 flights of concrete stairs and emerged into the quiet, carpeted hallway of Adeline's floor. She was waiting, her apartment door ajar. She pulled them inside and bolted it behind them, her face pale. She looked from Graham to Sylvie, her gaze lingering on the delicate calico fur along Sylvie's jawline. Her skepticism was gone, replaced by a stunned, fearful acceptance. "In here," she said, leading them into her living room. The apartment was a sanctuary of order and warmth. For the first time since they left the park, Graham felt he could breathe. He sank onto her sofa, the adrenaline finally leaving him, replaced by a profound exhaustion. Sylvie sat beside him, her shoulder pressing against his. Adeline stood before them, her arms crossed. "You're going to tell me everything," she said. It was not a request. Graham looked at Sylvie, who gave a slight nod. And so he did. He told her about Kaylan, about the faction, about Everett's quiet, menacing arrival. He left nothing out. When he finished, the room was silent save for the distant sound of city traffic. Adeline walked to the window and peered through the blinds, her posture tense. "The gray sedan is still out there," she said. "They know you came in this direction. They just don't know where." Graham felt a spike of fear. "We've endangered you." Adeline turned from the window, and for the first time Graham saw not a skeptic or a cynic, but a fiercely protective friend. "You're my friend, Graham. You came to me for help. That's the end of the discussion." She looked at Sylvie. "And anyone who is with him is with me." Sylvie's brilliant green eyes softened. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with an emotion that needed no translation across galaxies. Your trust is a greater gift than you can imagine. In the quiet safety of the apartment, with a new, unlikely ally standing guard, Graham took Sylvie's hand. His world had shrunk from a sprawling, indifferent city to this small room, but it had never felt so full. His lonely life of quiet observation was over. He was a protector, a partner, a man with a purpose that reached for the stars. And looking at Sylvie, he knew he would not trade it for anything. Adeline moved from the window, her expression all business. Sentiment is nice, but it won't get us out of this. They'll eventually get a warrant or a thermal scan or whatever it is people like that use. We need a plan, and we need it now. Graham nodded, his mind shifting from protector to strategist. You're right. They're patient. They'll wait us out. He turned to Sylvie. Everett thinks he has you cornered. He's arrogant. He believes I'm just some old man you charmed. That arrogance is a weakness, Sylvie said, her voice steady. She reached into a small, nondescript pouch she wore at her side and retrieved a smooth, dark stone, no bigger than his thumb. This is a communication node. It is keyed to my unique biological signature. She placed it on the coffee table. The stone remained inert, a simple piece of polished rock. It can create a localized broadcast, powerful enough to reach a KLN relay buoy hidden in your asteroid belt, but it requires a direct line of sight to the sky and a significant power source. It will also be highly detectable for the few seconds it is active. Everett's people will know its exact location the moment I turn it on. Adeline leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the stone. So you use it, they pinpoint you, and it's over. Exactly, Graham said, a thought beginning to form. Which is why Sylvie won't be anywhere near it when it activates. Both women looked at him. Everett is hunting a KLN emissary, Graham continued, his voice gaining confidence. He's not looking for a retired accountant from the city planning department. He's watching this building, but his real focus is on her. He gestured to Sylvie. We need to give him what he's looking for. He stood and walked to Adeline's window, carefully peering through a slit in the blinds. The gray sedan was still there. A second vehicle, a dark van, was now parked across the street. They've brought in more people. They're settling in for a siege. Graham turned back to them. The park. It has to be the park. Go back there, Adeline asked, incredulous. That's the first place they'd expect. Not if they think we're still trapped here, Graham countered. We create a diversion, something that pulls their attention away from this building long enough for one of us to get out. That person takes the node to the park. The other two leave in the opposite direction. Sylvie's green eyes studied him, a deep respect shining within them. You want to split up? It's the only way, he said. The park is perfect. The great lawn has a clear view of the sky. And I know every path, every maintenance tunnel, every blind spot in that entire place. I spent years just watching. His past as a quiet observer was now their greatest weapon. Adeline crossed her arms, processing the logic. Okay, let's say we get the node out. Who takes it? Who runs? And how do we power it? It can draw from a municipal power grid if I can get it close enough to a junction box, Sylvie explained. It would only take a moment. I'll take the node, Adeline said without hesitation. They're looking for him, she pointed to Graham, and for you. They don't know who I am. I'm just a woman walking her dog. You don't have a dog, Graham said. I can borrow one, she retorted. Mrs. Gable next door has a yappy little thing that would love a walk. I can get out, head for the park, and plant the device. While I'm doing that, you two need to disappear. Graham felt a surge of gratitude for his friend. She was practical, brave, and exactly the ally they needed. Sylvie and I will leave through the sub-level garage. There's a service exit that opens into the alley a block west. We can be gone before they realize the front door was a misdirection. The plan was audacious. It was dangerous, but it felt right. It was a plan born of their combined strengths, Adeline's pragmatism, Sylvie's knowledge, and his own quiet, meticulous observation. Later, as Adeline was making quiet arrangements over the phone, Graham and Sylvie stood near the kitchen, the low light of the apartment a comforting shield. "You see things others do not," Sylvie said softly, her hand finding his. "On Kalen, we have strategists who train for centuries. They would be impressed by you." Graham squeezed her hand, the delicate fur of familiar and precious texture. "I'm not a strategist. I'm just a man who doesn't want to lose the best thing that's ever happened to him." His internal world, once a quiet landscape of routine and solitude, was now filled with a fierce, protective fire. He was no longer watching life from a bench. He was in the heart of it, fighting for a future he never could have imagined. "The message you're sending," he asked, "what will it say?" "It will expose the faction's unsanctioned activities here on Earth," she replied. "It will prove Everett is acting against the accords of the Kalen Assembly. It will stop them from trying to exploit your world and force a recall of his mission." And then Sylvie met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw the answer that mattered more than any interstellar conflict. "And then my mission as an emissary will be over. I will simply be Sylvie, and I will be home." Adeline returned, holding a small key. "Okay, the diversion is set. My nephew who works downtown is going to call in a fire alarm for the building across the street in exactly 1 hour. It should pull their eyes away for a few minutes. Mrs. Gable's poodle is ready for his big mission." She held out the key. "This is for a storage unit my family keeps a few miles from here. It has clothes, emergency supplies, and an old, untraceable car. You head there. I'll head for the park." She placed the communication node in a small, insulated pouch. "Once I activate this, I'm heading straight to my sister's place. Don't try to contact me. Just go." Graham took the key. The weight of it felt immense. It was the key to their survival. He looked at the two women in the room, one from another world and one who had been his friend for 20 years. An impossible, unshakable alliance. "Be safe, Adeline," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You too," she replied, her gaze firm. "Now let's go over the timing one last time." The hour passed with the slow, deliberate ticking of a clock that seemed to measure their heartbeats. Graham watched the street from the edge of the window. Two men stood by a nondescript sedan, their attention fixed on the building's entrance. A third paced near the corner. They were patient. They were professionals. A piercing wail suddenly cut through the city's quiet evening air. Across the street, strobing lights flashed to life on a tall office building. The fire alarm. "That's my cue," Adeline said, grabbing the pouch. She gave Graham a quick, firm hug. "Get to the storage unit. Don't stop for anything." She looked at Sylvie, her expression a mix of awe and respect. "Take care of him." Sylvie nodded. "You have my word." Adeline moved to the door, took a deep breath, and walked out into the hallway with the practiced nonchalance of a resident annoyed by a false alarm. The men on the street looked up at the source of the noise, their focus momentarily diverted. It was the only opening they would get. "Now," Graham whispered, grabbing Sylvie's hand. They slipped out a service exit at the back of the apartment, descending a narrow flight of metal stairs into a dim alley. The sound of the alarm was fainter here, replaced by the dripping of an overflowing gutter. They moved quickly, their footsteps quiet on the damp pavement. Graham navigated the labyrinth of backstreets from memory, a map of his mundane life now serving as their path to freedom. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant siren a sign of their discovery. He felt Sylvie's grip tighten, not in fear but in shared resolve. They reached the storage facility 40 minutes later, breathless and unseen. Graham fumbled with the key, the cold metal slick in his hand. The corrugated steel door rolled up with a loud groan, revealing a small, cluttered space. Inside sat a dusty but solid-looking sedan. He pulled the door shut behind them, plunging them into near darkness. He found a battery-powered lantern on a shelf and clicked it on, casting a warm glow over their small sanctuary. "We made it," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "Because of you," Sylvie replied, her voice soft. She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You are not the man you were on that bench, Graham. I'm not, he agreed. He was someone who could run through alleys and hide in the dark all for her, but I hope Adeline is all right. As if summoned by his thought, a small device on Sylvie's wrist, one he had never seen before, began to glow a soft, emerald green. It was not the communication node Adeline carried, but something personal. She activated it, Sylvie said, her eyes wide with relief. The message is transmitting. They waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Graham imagined Adeline in the park, a lone figure sending a signal to a world he could not comprehend, drawing their enemies to her. The thought was a knot in his stomach. Then the device on Sylvie's wrist pulsed 3 times, a brighter, more brilliant green. A wave of calm washed over her face. "It is done," she whispered. "The assembly on Kaelan received it. They have issued a full recall order for Everett and his agents. His authority has been revoked. They are no longer a threat." Graham let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. The danger was over. The impossible plan had worked. An hour later, Adeline's call came through on a cheap burner phone from the emergency kit. "It's me," she said, her voice tired but triumphant. "They left. They just got in their car and drove away. I saw them go." "Are you safe?" Graham asked, his voice cracking with relief. "I'm at my sister's, annoying but safe. What about you two?" "We're good," he said, looking at Sylvie. "We're safe." "Good," Adeline said. "Don't call this number again. I'll see you when I see you, Graham. Tell your girlfriend she's one of a kind." The line went dead. Silence settled in the storage unit. The mission was over. The Allies were safe. The future, which had been a frantic dash for survival, was now an open, unknown expanse. "So your work here is done," Graham said, the statement hanging in the air between them. "Yes," Sylvie confirmed. "I am no longer an emissary. My people are not in danger, and neither is your world." He looked at her, at the kind eyes that had first drawn him in, the delicate fur that was as natural as his own skin. He couldn't imagine his life without her in it, without their bench, without the quiet understanding that had bloomed into this extraordinary adventure. "What will you do now?" he asked, his heart aching with the question. Sylvie stepped closer, her hands finding his. "When I first came here, I was looking for an ally, someone to help me protect my home." She met his gaze, and her green eyes held the warmth of 1,000 suns. "But I found a home instead, with you." Tears welled in his eyes. He had spent so many years feeling like his life was an ending, a slow fade into obscurity. But she had been right all along. It was just the beginning. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that felt new. They left the storage unit, taking the old car with them. They didn't have a destination, only a direction, forward. But first, they made one stop. The park was quiet, bathed in the gentle light of dawn. Their bench was empty, waiting for them. They sat down, the familiar wood a comforting presence. The distance across the path, which had once seemed like a vast chasm, was gone. They were together. "It's a beautiful day for a new beginning," Sylvie said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Graham wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. The lonely man on the park bench was a ghost, a memory from a different life. He was home.